Okay, let's dive in. Is there some kind of pattern, these mysterious deaths surrounding people who dig into UFOs, paranormal stuff? It's a pretty chilling question, honestly, and it's something that's been, well, whispered about, sometimes shouted about in the research community for a long, long time. It feels like more than just bad luck sometimes.
Right. And that's exactly what we're looking into today. We're exploring these claims head on. The idea that researchers, especially those getting some traction, maybe building an audience, that they could be in real danger. Danger from, well, unnamed forces who want to keep certain information under wraps. The thinking is the louder their voice, maybe the bigger the risk.
Yeah, it's a heavy thought. So, for this deep dive, we're focusing on a specific source, a report from back in July 2016. It seems like that report really brought things to a head, highlighted some recent events that amplified all these long-held worries. So, our mission here is to unpack what that report claims, look at the alleged patterns, examine the specific cases it brings up, and try to understand why this source suggests something really disturbing is going on.
And what really jumps out from the report is how consistent the theme is across these different cases. The document points to this pattern, you could say, where there's just profound mystery around how these researchers died. Again and again, the official story is suicide. But then you have family members, close friends saying, absolutely not. There was no sign. Often these were people apparently doing well, really absorbed in their work, passionate about what they were uncovering.
Okay, so following that thread, how far back does this report say this pattern goes? Does it, point to older cases that maybe set the stage for these worries?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. The report connects the dots going way back. It mentions figures like the astronomer Dr. M.K. Jessup. He was famously the first person to really talk publicly about the Philadelphia experiment details.
Yeah.
His death back in '59 also ruled a suicide under very mysterious circumstances. The report uses him as a kind of foundational example, suggesting this isn't a new phenomenon at all. It
Yeah.
implies a long history of, well, alleged suppression.
And Jessup wasn't the only one mentioned from back then, right? The report lists others too.
That's right, yeah. It details quite a few others, researchers, sure, but also former military folks, government insiders, people who supposedly blew the whistle on classified stuff, only to end up dead under suspicious circumstances. Names like Ronald Rummel come up, and notably John E. Mack, remember him? The Harvard psychiatrist. Highly respected, did all that work on alien abductions. The report really emphasizes that his death, like the others, happened under, let's say, very questionable conditions. All of them ufologists, all reportedly trying to find the truth.
Right, okay. And this is where it gets particularly unsettling because it brings those old fears right up to the moment that report was written. The 2016 source specifically flags two deaths that happened that month, July 2016. Deaths that it claims really poured fuel on the fire. Let's start with Gaurav Tiwari. What was it about his death that set off alarm bells so quickly in the community, according to the report?
Well, the report details how Tiwari, who was a pretty well-known UFO researcher in India, was found dead. Just found dead in his apartment in northwestern India. And what makes it especially concerning, as the source lays it out, is that he was a newlywed, just married. His family, his relatives were adamant. They stated he had absolutely zero reason to take his own life. They said he was totally normal, good spirits, right up until it happened. The report describes this scene. He was just having coffee with his wife, spending time with family, and then suddenly this loud thump from the bathroom. They find him unresponsive. Tried to revive him, couldn't. And despite everything the family said, ruled a suicide.
Wow. And then, just days later, another one, Max Spears. What does the report say about his situation?
Yeah, Max Spears, he was more on the paranormal investigator side, and he'd made some pretty out there claims himself, like being part of some secret government super soldier program. He was found unresponsive in his apartment in Warsaw, Poland. That was July 16th, 2016, just days after Tiwari. And just like with Tiwari, the report stresses that the details are murky, still not fully explained even when the report was written. The source adds Spears to this growing list, a list that also includes people like Paul Vingay, remember him, leading crop circle researcher. He even worked on that Mel Gibson movie, Signs. He was found floating off the coast near Portsmouth, England back in February 2009, another mysterious death.
Okay, but maybe the case that gets the most attention, the one the report goes into in really chilling detail, is Phil Schneider. He's described as someone who, well, basically claimed to blow the lid off alleged government cover-ups of these huge underground bases, supposedly housing aliens. Schneider was definitely controversial, right up until he died in '96. The report talks about his claims working for the government as a geologist on some of these underground sites. Specifically, it mentions 1979, working for Morrison Benson, building an addition to a deep underground military base, or DUMB, at Dulce, New Mexico.
Right. And this is where his story, at least as the report presents it, gets really dramatic
Right.
and violent. According to Schneider, while they were drilling, they accidentally broke through into this massive artificial cavern. And inside, he claimed, was a secret base full of what he specifically called gray aliens. He alleged this directly led to what's known as the 1979 Dulce firefight. He claims something like 67 government workers and military personnel died in that firefight. He said he was one of only 3 survivors, but badly injured. The report notes how he'd actually show people his scars, his missing fingers, saying they were from being hit by some kind of alien weapon during that fight. He also later blamed the cancer he developed on radiation exposure from that incident.
And he didn't just keep quiet about it. The report makes a point that just 2 years before he died, Schneider started this intense lecture tour, traveling all over, trying to expose what he saw as government cover-ups, black budgets, UFOs, all of it. He even claimed the Eisenhower administration made some kind of treaty with extraterrestrials back in 1954. Pretty explosive stuff. So then, January 17th, 1996, just 2 years after starting this tour, Philip Schneider is found dead in his apartment. Initially, the coroner's office apparently ruled it a stroke, said he'd been dead for maybe 5 to 7 days.
But, and this is a huge but, according to the report, some really disturbing details came out later, details suggesting it wasn't a stroke at all. It was discovered that a catheter tube, one of his medical tubes, was found wrapped tightly around his neck. The coroner then apparently tried to reclassify it as a suicide. But here's the critical point the report raises. Anyone who knew Phil knew about his hand injuries. He was missing almost all the fingers on one hand. They argue it would have been physically impossible, just mechanically impossible for him to tie that rubber hose around his own neck in a knot with the kind of force needed to strangle himself. Given those injuries, well, the suicide ruling seems highly suspect to people familiar with the case, as the report lays out in quite some detail. So if we sort of pull all this together from our deep dive into the source material, what we see is this consistent, really unsettling narrative, a reported pattern of suspicious deaths involving prominent researchers in the UFO and paranormal fields. And these deaths are frequently, maybe too frequently, labeled suicides, even when families and friends raise serious objections, pointing to contradictions. It stretches from historical figures, like Dr. Jessup, right through to those more recent cases in 2016, Gaurav Tiwari, Max Spears, and culminates in this really scrutinized story of Phil Schneider.
And this should maybe make you pause. Whether you've always been a skeptic or maybe you find this whole area of research kind of laughable, you should perhaps reconsider based on what this source presents. It frames these cases as real. It implies people are allegedly, quote, dropping dead for speaking nothing but the truth. Dying, it suggests, because they challenged oppressors who have kept us in the dark. The source really urges you to look closer, to genuinely consider what might be happening.
Which leaves us with a pretty important question for you to think about, really. If these accounts, these stories of suspicious deaths outlined in the report, are actually happening, what could that possibly imply about how far certain groups, certain entities might go to keep information suppressed? And what does it tell us about the whole business of seeking truth in these controversial fields, especially when the stakes are allegedly so incredibly high?
Yeah.
Something to definitely ponder.